Hi, my name is Laurie Groh, and I am co-owner at Shoreside Therapies. Today we have Snyder, not Sydney, with us today. So welcome, Sydney. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Lori. I'm glad to be here. First time doing anything Facebook Live, so
Yes, and so
really,
far so good.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Sydney, first question is, who do you help? Who would your ideal client be?
I think that my ideal client is kind of on a spectrum of things. So first, like age-wise, I see individuals, like kind of later teens up to late adulthood. I think most of my experiences in this like more of the older teens and beyond. I'm primarily with adults, but absolutely open to working with teens through like transitional periods, especially like entering college or navigating things like that. As for the adult population, kind of any age range. I feel like my experience has never been like just these 10 years of life.
Yeah.
And then I'm really interested in family dynamics. So a lot of my interest is in like navigating family relationships. So that could be a mom and her daughter. That could be um, a family that, maybe there's addiction in the family and they're trying to figure out how to manage a transition home. So within that spectrum, I think the age range is a lot different there because the family is made up of so many people. So population specific, I really enjoy navigating those like difficulties in the family, and then also just individuals going through life transitions, working on like the maybe looking at like depression and anxiety, feeling kind of like I don't know, a chief complaint I get is like I'm just not feeling like myself right now, and I'm not sure how to get back to that or what that
Yeah.
even looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, kind of going back to the family dynamics, there is so much there for I think everyone. And it would be great if there was guidance through some of those transitions and difficulties and just making sure that um, that the family has that space and time to talk about what that transition would look like. Seems to me like that would be a really important thing for somebody to do when they're transitioning from like a treatment center back home, or they're transitioning from a different, going from home life to college, or maybe even back from college to home or after college. So you help with all those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like really just any dynamic shift in the family, like we're going through welcoming a new family member or managing, I don't know, my mom's new boyfriend, right? And still learning how to communicate effectively because the primary concern is never, it's very abnormal for it to be like, I don't want this relationship. It's more of like, it's not working. And we're family and and family I define as like people we choose. It's not necessarily always blood. And
Yeah.
I think thinking about like, I just want to communicate better, or we aren't seeing eye to eye and it's painful for both of us.
Yeah.
And we see so many families like often, pull apart and write it off because it's just so difficult. And I think having a non-biased party there to kind of be like, hey, can we take a step back? Like what are your needs and what are your needs? And how do we compromise or meet in the middle a little bit to make it feel safe for everybody? At least to have some sort of functioning, even if it's not perfect, because I don't think that really exists.
Right. I've never seen that. I've never seen that perfect family, except maybe Full House. That seemed kind of perfect. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we could
I
unpack
don't. Yeah, but I think too, right? Like when you're in the room with a family and there's that additional person, that would be you being in there saying, "Hey, let's pause for a moment. What is actually happening right now?" That can be extremely powerful because nobody does that when they're in a normal conversation with family members. And knowing what's actually going on internally for somebody can be a huge breakthrough for family members and relationships of, oh, you're yelling right now. Let's pause. What's actually happening? And when you're asking that question, a lot of times people are really surprised to hear what that answer is. It could be fierce, I'm scared, or I'm hurt, but
Mhm.
that other person is only hearing the anger.
Right, and usually it's like the intentions are typically really genuine, and there's this, like, we're communicating on completely different
Yeah.
wavelengths. So, I'm here in logic mind, and you're in your emotion mind, and we can't get there. We're not communicating, and I think taking a step back, I think that's where dialectics of there can be two truths really helps of, like, humanizing that experience, and that goes for individual therapy too, of, like, I'm having a hard time seeing this person's truth because my truth is this, and it feels really invalidating because they're not seeing mine first,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How do we humanize and, like, build connection through discord rather than push away, for relationships that we want to have?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense of like figuring out how to be there with that person. It's not going to be perfect, but how to connect through some of this versus separate and disconnect and avoid. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right. So, what, Sydney, is your approach to helping? So, are you more directive? Are you more indirect in your approach when working with a client?
Mm. That's a good question because I think that I think the answer is it depends, right? I think meeting a client where they're at is something you'll hear from a lot of therapists, like, "Oh, we're gonna meet you where you're at." And I think the way to go further with that is like you're the expert on your life, right? You in the sense of like that's your lived experience. And I am trying to come in through the expert lens of a therapist. And in order to make that relationship work together, we look at setting goals together and how can I be useful to you?
Mhm.
If you want accountability, if you want a space to just talk, right, for somebody to listen. But first and foremost, I think like creating a space that's safe so you can even make those decisions. Like in the first couple sessions, it'll be really like what kind of looking at exploring what it is you want, what you think you need, what kind of feedback you're open to, what level of accountability you're hoping for, and then pivoting as you grow and we grow together in our relationship. There's a phrase that I once heard that I think holds a lot of, I don't know, a lot of value in my therapeutic relationships. It's like high warmth, high expectations. So like we're gonna create a warm space for you to create expectations for yourself or
Yeah.
to work through the expectations that you have for yourself, whether they're too harsh or maybe
Yeah.
you're trying to hold them at a higher level
Hmm.
in whatever capacity that you need.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that combination because that's what tends to be challenging for a lot of people is they might have the high expectations, but not being too kind when they're not meeting those expectations. Yeah, yeah. Or when they're making an expectation, they're not necessarily recognizing the other factors that might get in the way of that expectation. And then putting a lot of that blame on themselves when really it's like, well, you can reach these goals, but we got to go to A to B to C, not A to Z.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And like how can I help you help yourself in getting
Yeah.
there, right? And like
Yes.
I think if you look at more population specific, like my background is like I come from a background in working in really intense levels of care, so residential, partial hospitalization, inpatient, outpatient, in like several different populations, and within that, it's um, I think I've learned to kind of help navigate like there's so much going on. How do we centralize your focus when the primary concern is here, but there's other things
Yeah.
happening and pivot? Like the human experience, like we're going to have to pivot. Things aren't going to go as planned. And how do we cope and practice self compassion in that process of like, I got to show up for myself first. And it might not look perfect today. And that's going to be hard. It,
Right.
it
Right.
can be really devastating with like, I take anxiety or depression, like, I want to do these things, but I'm not doing them, and then I feel really frustrated with myself, and it furthers that kind of, um, I don't know, cycle
Yeah.
of avoidance or, withdraw from my life,
Yeah.
and, you know, my role is just, like, normalizing, like, validating, and, like, helping you to set manageable goals to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And what to do, after, you know, if it's, do you need to, um, have more compassion through it, right? Which tends to be the case for most people, I think, is most people aren't coming in because they're too compassionate towards themselves. Yeah.
Still
Yeah.
waiting for that. No,
Yeah.
haven't had that before.
Yes. Yeah. And that hopefully that normalizes that experience. A lot of times it's that critical part that makes that feedback loop continue on. So being able to be there, like you said, and guide that person, okay, well, let's see what we need to do here instead so that you're not going into that same cycle. Maybe there's a different way to experience this. Maybe there's a way not to avoid. Maybe there's a way to go into that experience with a different mindset.
Right, and,
Yeah.
like, just even acknowledging the experience you're having first, right?
Yeah.
Of, like, especially another area I like is, like, grief and loss, and that can be actual loss or ambiguous loss where, like, something's really changed in our life and we don't know how to handle that loss of a relationship or a period of time, and I think, like, learning how to acknowledge and address it and say, like, "This is painful."
Yeah.
I don't we're not like, as a therapist, I think one thing I'm very clear about is, like, I'm not here to fix it, right? If there was something to fix, you're like, we're not people aren't broken. I don't view people like that. I think it's like there is pain and suffering, and it's like a lack of a like, I don't know how to cope with it. I don't know how to
Yeah.
tolerate it. And sitting in that space and holding that space for somebody when they're not comfortable doing it yet on their own, I think is the primary start of it all before we even get to like, okay, how are we gonna get in there and
Right.
get right? Because a lot of people come in eager, but kind of slowing down and saying, well, how did that feel?
Yeah. Yeah. And where are you right now, right? Which is a common thing for us to check in on of let's be realistic, let's meet you where you're at. What is going on right now? Let's start there. Let's create that foundation of a relationship first. And it doesn't have to be something where you're spending months and months and months on that builds over time, but you have to listen first, which is our job to listen, to know, to understand, and through that becomes a lot of desire to change, that support that maybe isn't there with other people. Yes. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. So that might be my phone. Sorry about that if it's squeaking. So what are your strengths as a therapist?
I think strengths, right? I think authenticity, like I like to I like to make it like there's not like, okay, Sydney as the therapist and then Sydney as a person. I think I've really grown into like being myself in therapy and not I think it can be really inauthentic when somebody is like I as a therapist have everything together and I'm a perfect box of coping skills and I've never had anxiety and
Right.
that's just not the reality of it. So I like to create like an authentic, like comfortable experience. So I will be pretty casual at times when getting to know somebody. I think using humor,
Mhm.
allowing it to be a space that we can laugh together, you can cry with me, and anything in between where you feel safe to say what's going on with you and like not judged by my presence. Like I would like it to feel like you're sitting with yourself and that there's just somebody there prompting that.
Right, right, right. Somebody else there to help with different perceptions or what might be what might this mean or what does this mean to you of that actual time to reflect, um and that it's not a judgmental space. You're creating that space of hopefully complete comfort, and with that, then I'm assuming when you're with a client and you're in that comfortable environment, that asking and challenging them doesn't feel critical. It feels like we are here together. Let's work together to get you what you need and what you want. Yeah.
Right. And I think that like that connection that we try to like I form and I get a lot of feedback about is like that makes it feel like when I'm pointing out an incongruence, like you're saying you want to do this, but
Yeah.
you're doing this, it feels less like an attack and
Yeah.
more like, hey, can we look at this together? And if you're not ready, my job is to know. I think my flexible approach too is like, let's pivot from that. Like
Yes.
maybe we need to spend more time here first. And then
Yep.
that's okay. Versus this like pressurized, like this is the plan. Like
Mhm.
I would say while I have like this flexibility, I also then try to use accountability because we've been authentic together. So
Yeah.
one thing I'll do with most of my clients, should they desire, is like kind of like assignments. Like what can you work on until the next time we see each other? So
Yeah.
you feel like there's measurable progress because I think while some people need just talk therapy where there's a place to talk, a lot of people want to see that growth and don't know how to measure it by themselves. Like, okay,
Right.
therapy went well today.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that, the homework piece, the assignment piece. Wish there was like a better name for it though, right? Like it makes it sound like this is what you got to do, but really it's something that's so collaborative of like, how does that sound? What if you try paying attention to what's gray in your life? That's one that I might use where it's not like I'm writing a bunch of things down, but you're trying to notice, or some things like that where it's not you're doing a book report or
Right. Right. Well, I think
slideshow.
people practice and use examples. So it's like
Yeah.
maybe I'm the client and I'm your cousin and I want to set boundaries with you. So we'll practice how I'm going to say those words and then
Hmm.
we'll see how you felt about doing it. Maybe your anxiety was too high and it didn't happen. And, all right, that's fine.
Yeah.
Glad you even thought about it. And how do we again pivot and learn from that rather than like it's not school. The second
Right.
therapy becomes so much work that it's adding stress to your life. I don't think it's really effective.
Yes, yes. Same with self-care, right? That can be a similar thing where self-care can be then the checklist item. I have to take a bubble bath tonight, or do yoga tonight, and if you're not feeling like it's actually working or benefiting you, and it becomes one more task on your list, then it's not going to be something that you're going to be drawn to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So, um, next question. What does a client expect to experience with a session with you? And I know you kind of mentioned it a bit earlier, but anything to add in that?
I think the first session, um, coming in, I'll talk a little bit about just like the introduction to therapy of like what this is going to be like, the basics of confidentiality. This is a safe place just for you, informed consent, like some of these really standard things that um help you to feel like you understand what the point is, right? And then we'll get into a lot of like I just will ask a lot because I want to hear and get to know you, right?
Yeah.
Those first couple sessions, it feels a little bit more me asking the questions um more intentionally than maybe as much as it flows into, because I think getting that background helps helps me as a therapist to understand how we can navigate your goals. And sometimes someone jumps in and is like, I'm going through a breakup and I need to talk about that right now.
Yeah.
And we pivot.
Yeah.
I think it's just usually 45 to 60 minutes of sitting there and getting to know that person, making sure they feel safe. Um, 'Cause if they don't feel safe, then they're and letting them know that, like, if this doesn't feel great, let me help you get somebody else that would maybe make that feel that way. Like,
Yeah.
there's no pressure here. If you're not in if this doesn't feel helpful or satisfying, like, let's find you somebody that does.
Mhm.
'Cause
Mhm.
it's really brave of you to even show up for therapy.
Right, right. And I think we agree, I know at Shoreside that we aren't putting ourselves in a space of being hurt by that, you know. It truly is. We trust everyone at our practice.
Laurie, can you hear me? I can't hear you now. I can't hear can you hear me?
We'll have to cut this.
I
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you.
me?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. We have our first blooper, like for real blooper. This is good. Thanks for being a part of it.
Perfect.
Okay, so back to our last question. So, what are the results that somebody could experience coming in to see you? What could they expect to have happen?
I think, feeling like they know themselves better and that they are able to advocate and show up for themselves in the way that they hope they had before and they didn't think they could.
Yeah,
Um, and in a lens of, like, continuing to grow and finding areas that they didn't know that they wanted to. Um, I don't know, like, with a lot of my addiction clients, will look at, like, I feel fulfilled without that. Like, the
yeah,
reward
yeah,
piece of, like, my life is I feel connected. I feel like the things I was escaping for a long time and avoiding, I can do. I can do, and it doesn't not necessarily feel perfect or great or my favorite thing to do, but I can do that, and I believe in myself again,
yeah,
at least a little bit, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's really beautiful, right? Like we do have a pretty amazing job to get to see somebody transform and see that they can understand themselves in such a way that they can do those hard things and those painful things potentially and come out the other end
Right.
and feel that they're valuable. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So that's our time.
Yeah.
It was so nice talking to you, Sydney.
Thanks.
So if anyone wants to reach out to Sydney, you can check on the bottom. I will be putting your contact information right there. Otherwise, you can go to shoresidetherapies.com and find Sydney's bio and information, and you can go ahead and schedule right online.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I look forward to it.
Yeah. Thanks, Sydney. We'll
Thanks,
talk soon,
Megan.
like real soon,
Bye.
like in a minute.
Yeah, see you in a second. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.